Amanda.
What's up? I'm Jordana.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
Hi, I'm Neil, and today we're talking about Mandy, directed by Panos Cosmatos, 2018 uh, horror action fantasy movie.
Psychological thriller.
yeah. So it's about Mandy. She becomes the target of a murderous cult after rejecting them. She's murdered. Her husband Red sets out to take revenge for her death. Um, this movie's pretty crazy.
I just
I,
want to preface it by Neil, Amanda, and I watched this in person. So Neil was able to see our physical reactions to this movie because all we could say at the end was this was a lot and we weren't able to discuss. We just had to get up and go.
I just want to ask, did you guys like the movie in general? Like, oh man.
Okay, no. I'm trying to think of my answer. So I did like it. I did. The only thing is I wouldn't recommend this to everybody. I think that's like the best way to put it. Like I myself enjoyed it, but I wouldn't just recommend this to anybody. You know, like even for me, I feel like anyone, and I feel like you guys know this by now as well. Anyone who's close to me knows that they wouldn't recommend me this movie. Why? Because I would close my eyes for a lot of it. But I do think that I enjoyed it because I didn't have time to close my eyes. Like, I don't know if you guys felt this way or not, but it was just so disorienting to where I felt like I had to watch. And then by the time that I realized what was about to happen, it had already happened. Like, especially, I'm sure we're going to go more into this later, but when Brother Hanker was killed, he was just cleaning the car and it was so sudden yet so gory and so gruesome that it really threw me off. But yeah, I think that's where I stand. I would honestly watch it again.
That's what I recommend. When I first watched it, I was waiting for this movie to come out for like a really long time. I was like, this is awesome. And then it came out and I watched it. And like at first I was like, man, the same reaction everyone else has. And then I was just like, I have to watch it again. Like it keeps calling you back. So I watched it again, and I've watched it probably like 10 times now. And after the second time, my enjoyment of it went way up. I liked way more of it. There were some scenes that were like, pretty slow. Like the scene where like it's Jeremiah and he's talking and his face is like morphing into Mandy's. First time I watched it, I was like, come on, get on with it. But now I really, really love that scene because I just love watching it and looking at it, and it like puts you in like a trance, especially if you have like really good audio or headphones on. Like it's just so like enchanting, and like it's like you're looking at something you really shouldn't be. And that's what I love about it. So
Very intrusive, that scene. Like as a viewer watching, you just feel like we're intruding and you feel like you shouldn't be watching it.
Yeah.
But
Okay, so for me, when we first started this movie, I was like, why is this making me feel like I'm on some kind of acid trip? And then I found out everyone in the entire movie was, and we were just watching them on their acid trip. Like I was looking at Mandy's eyes, and one of them was just like darker, and like her pupil was 10 times more dilated than the other. And I was just like, yo, is this girl like, is she good? Like that's every time I see one of my friends high, I'm like, are you good? Rather than asking them like, oh, are you high? It's like, are you good? So I was like, is she good? Like, is she good?
definitely was not.
Definitely not looking okay right now.
Not to mention she got stung by a wasp that was
not no wasp.
gigantic. No, it was. I looked it up because I was like, I've never seen that bug before, but apparently it is a giant black wasp.
Yikes.
I don't know what they put in her eye either.
It was LSD. It was LSD. Because some people take LSD by putting it underneath their tongue. I don't know why I know this. They put it underneath their tongue, or you can do it with the tab, but you still put it underneath your tongue. Usually it's taken orally.
Is that why the other lady just the rest of it?
I always love that. The more you watch the movie too, I feel like the more you like the villains. I mean, obviously they're not good people. I'm not saying like, oh, they're awesome, but like the guy who plays Jeremiah just
Mhm.
makes me so happy. Every single time he's on screen, I'm like, man, this guy is so good at being this like creepy weirdo guy that I just love watching him. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like watching a great villain like Joker or something, and it's like he's just funny and like legitimately fun to watch in this movie.
Linus Roach definitely did an amazing job with that role.
Yep.
Like he took Jeremiah to whole new levels, and I wouldn't know who else I would put as that person.
Mm-hmm.
That scene where he's talking to Brother Swan when he's asking him to go and get Mandy was incredible to me. I felt like at first I was wondering, does he have some kind of disability, because he was like laying down, it was almost as though he was in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And as the movie went on, I was like, oh my gosh, like his ability to act so crazy and also have such consciousness of like power that he has over all these people. It was so intertwined in a way that I thought was so well executed. Like he did a really, really good job. I mean, all of them honestly really played into their roles to where you kind of forget that they're humans and like actors in real life.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That scene with Brother Swan and Jeremiah. I don't know if Neil and Amanda remember, but I was like, this is a little homoerotic because of
Isn't
how
it
close
weird?
they were.
And like he was like stroking his face, and I was like, is there
Are
something
we
going
about to
on?
kiss right
Yeah,
now?
I was
That's
so
the vibe it was
confused.
giving me.
Yeah, I think that was definitely intentional too. It wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
like be weird, it was like I want you to grab his face like you're in a loving embrace or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Have you all seen John Wick?
No,
yes.
because the dog dies. I can't do it.
Fair enough. I didn't know the dog dies when I was watching it the first time.
I didn't
I
even
feel
know
like
there was a dog in the movie.
I feel
It's the
like this
driving force behind the first one, yeah.
yeah, I feel like I was watching John Wick while on LSD.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Like I feel like it's the same general plot. um but just like with a lot of like weird trippy
Yeah.
visuals.
Mm.
And kind of less like I don't know, I felt like this wasn't very plot heavy in the sense that it's kind of like we don't know really anything about this cult, and we don't really know that much about Red. We don't know anything about Mandy. And so I don't know, that was kind of that put me off a little bit, but I also that goes into my quote for later, so we'll talk about that.
Although I do think that the ambiguity of their background, I feel like added to the movie in a sense where we didn't have to worry about that. Like I feel like there were certain like things were implied where they had, how do I say this? Like psychological hardships almost in the past. And then also Red, it was implied that he had been an alcoholic or was just like, like to drink a lot. Which I think for me, it added to it, but it also like I do wish that I was like, oh, like I wish they would elaborate on that because I'm someone that likes the backstory. I don't mean this in a way that it sounds, but I like sometimes like hearing about the sad stuff because I feel like it adds to the character. But I completely agree with what you're saying, Amanda.
Yeah.
After the love it or list it, I definitely want to get into a conversation about that, about like the amount of story that's in it. But we should just go right into the love it or list it.
Okay. Worked.
The score was the one thing that I felt as though pretty much made the movie for me. Like the music is so aggressive and it honestly intensified my entire viewing experience. And that I feel like says a lot given the fact that it's so disoriented and the effects and the edits are so saturated and so red and so intense, I guess. And I feel like there were a lot of moments where, for example, when Mandy's getting burned, we see Red screaming, but we don't hear him screaming. We only hear the score. And I feel like that almost made it more unsettling and scary, like hearing the music and like almost feeling the scene itself and feeling like we're there. Whereas like there was another scene where it was after Mandy had died and Red is screaming and just like so sad over Mandy, and there's no music at all. And I think that they made really good decisions on differentiating what scenes would be a lot more effective to the viewer as far as like sound went and music when I really enjoyed that aspect of the movie.
Yeah, I had that exact same note written down. That kind of in that scene where you're watching her burn, kind of not having that audio makes it even more gutting in a way. You're kind of imagining it. And then to contrast that with the scene in the bathroom, and I thought that bathroom scene was really intriguing, because I feel like it had a really interesting like tone duality where he's kind of like he's going through it, like he is just in so much pain, is screaming, but then it's like a really weird bathroom with like really bright obnoxious tile, and he's like in his underwear, and it's like it's so horrific that it almost verges on like the absurd to the like you almost want to laugh, but you don't because he's literally grieving. And so that definitely I was like, oh, like, and I feel like Nicolas Cage really did a good job with that in that moment. Like I was like, wow, like holy shit, like that scene really hit well.
Okay, so for me, I loved the color in this movie. And I feel like that really plays in with the bathroom scene because I loved that bathroom. I thought it was really cool. I loved the house itself that they lived in and all the like windows and mirrors with like throughout the entire house. And the coloring of the house itself, how it was like dark, but whenever you were inside it, it seemed automatically brighter. Um, in the bathroom being as bright as it was, like contrasting with red and how he's like going through it, but then yellow is like a color for happiness and usually seen in like babies' bedrooms and stuff like that. So having it in the background of that scene, especially when he's going through like a complete mental breakdown after seeing Mandy being burned alive, you know, it just really contrasted with his feelings and I loved it. Another thing I loved was Mandy's artwork in the beginning of the movie. That was such an amazing scene, and I don't know, those are my loves.
Something that I also really enjoyed, and I don't particularly know why, I think it was honestly just like the way in which she told the story was when she was talking about the story of the Starlings in the beginning of the movie with Red. And it was the only part of the movie that I remember being like calm. And so I feel like it was a good bridge to the chaos and trauma that the rest of the movie has. But it also, I feel like a lot of the movie to me almost felt like this was supernatural. And there were moments where I found myself getting reminders. I'm like, oh, you know what? They're just human. And I think if I were to watch that movie again, I would appreciate that even more because I'm like, oh wow, they feel so human here. Because even in the beginning of the movie, the place itself feels so out of the ordinary. It almost feels like it's in a different planet, the way that the colors are so saturated and it's just so different. So I think that's also why I say that I would watch this movie again, is because I think the way that my perspective would change would honestly make me watch the movie in a different light, if that makes sense.
I know exactly what you mean. To contrast with you, I hated that story scene. Red had just woken up from a bad dream, and Mandy's like, "You're having a bad dream. Let me tell you this horrible story." I thought it was completely like off her rocker. I was like, "Aren't you supposed to make him feel better, you know, if he's having a bad dream?" But I feel like that story definitely tells a lot about her childhood and her like personality and why she's a little bit off and like how you can see her like in that one scene where she was crying over the baby deer that had been died, like that had died. Like you can see why she reacted in the way that she did and like what she actually cares about in life, you know. So it did tell a lot.
I also think it's interesting that in her dream she sees the dead baby deer, and then in his dream he sees her. So kind of like, but then she ends up dying too. I don't know. I was like, I feel like that's gotta mean something. Dreams never don't mean something.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know if either of those scenes have any meaning. And that's like one thing, like I kind of wish they made the deer thing kind of matter. Because I feel like at the end of the day, it really doesn't. Like that scene could just be cut entirely.
Well,
Like
deers
it's
also
nice
hold so
visually
much.
and audio wise, like it's cool, and I enjoy looking at it, but like objectively, like it's really not necessary and kind of weird, and makes a lot of people think that the movie's like pretentious. But I don't think the movie is actually really doing much thematically. I think it's kind of a lesser. I think the themes of this movie are not nearly as important as most of the other aspects of it.
I completely agree with you, especially with that scene being cut. It did give me like Get Out vibes, but at the same time, it did not tie to any of the rest of the movie. And I thought it was just like giving more on Mandy's background. And like the only thing I'd see it kind of tying to was her Starling story with like more dead animals. But other
Yeah.
than that, didn't really connect fully to like the end plots.
I would argue this. I think that the deer did hold some meaning, because I feel like deers are a very like prominent icon of innocence, and the idea of how Mandy was killed, I think, is a good parallel to that. Whereas like, I don't know, I do think it holds meaning. I think everything in a movie is intentional. I think everything holds meaning, especially if it's a scene that's so out there. Because the deer also, like, I remember thinking that doesn't look like a real deer. Like, it looked weird to me, you
It was a
know?
newborn.
Oh, it
A
was?
newborn. Yeah,
Okay, well
just out
then,
of the mother and had died.
I did not know
You
that.
know, I think there's stuff with deer in like Artemis in like Greek mythology, and the director is of Greek descent. So there he might be doing something with that. He also talks about like the planets. So I haven't looked into this, but kind of my idea of it before was like this might have something to do with Greek mythology,
I have a
but I
question
can't
for
be
you
sure.
guys that I immediately wanted to ask you guys once we started talking about the dreams. What did you guys think of some of them being cartoon?
That was my list.
Okay,
I
that was my only list it really.
I feel like the whole movie, I was kind of struggling to figure out whether this was fantasy sci-fi or whether it wasn't. Like, I couldn't figure out how much was like kind of just supposed to be on this whole like things feel surreal versus things
Mm.
actually are surreal, especially with the black skulls. Like, what were they? Were they people? I don't know. Um, and so I feel like that those moments where it would suddenly be like where we had like the title card random, like when it said Mandy with all of the branches coming out, or when they had the one where it says like the children of the new dawn and it has like the, like I feel like that kind of took me out of the movie for a second in a weird way. And I just felt like it didn't really contribute that much to it. But that's just me.
That's a really good thing to bring up though, because this movie is really heavily inspired by a movie called Heavy Metal, which came out in 1982, and it's a bunch of animated shorts like vignettes, and each one has this like one like recurring thing, which is this green orb of like power, and it's an animated movie. It's animated by a bunch of different people, um, and that animation style takes a lot from the last segment in the movie, and so I think the choice was to cement that like influence in animated segments. I personally really like the animated segments. I think they could just look a little bit better. It's really not a big deal. But I think that's there's definitely not like no reason why they didn't include that. It's definitely a homage to this movie Heavy Metal that has a lot of influence over this movie. So
I think for me, this movie obviously, I would assume that most people struggle with seamlessness when they watch it. Like, I feel like all of this disorientation causes complete awareness that this is a movie and it doesn't have much seamlessness. But I will say that I think because of how disoriented it was throughout, it did have a sense of that. But those cartoon bits for me, like what Amanda was saying, I'm completely with her, where it completely took me out of the movie. And considering how intense this movie is and how much it comes with, it was really difficult for me to put myself back in quickly. Like I kind of had to have something super really, or have something happen that was super like gory or consistent with certain themes throughout the film to like put me back in. But of course that's intentional by them. So
See, for me, I liked the animated portion of the movie. It definitely brought me back to like Kill Bill and how one of the like in the first Kill Bill, how part of the movie was for Lucy Liu's background, it was just all animated. It brought me to that, and I was like, oh, this is so cool, because I really enjoyed that in Kill Bill. So when I saw it in this movie, I was like, this is amazing. It just wasn't what I was expecting. It's not what that I expected them to animate. And at the same time, I was looking at it, and I had just like watched this anime about like symmetry. And I was looking at Mandy, and I was like, the symmetry of her body is just not adding up to how I would picture it in my head. And I know this seems so weird, but because of like outside influences, it was making me analyze the hell out of just the symmetry of her. And especially when like her eyes are like the different colors, it really messed with the symmetry. But that animated scene, I didn't think it took me out of the movie. I think it made me like enjoy it more because I'm such an anime person. So it just brought me in.
One thing that I do want to say that I think is the most memorable part for me in this movie, and it's honestly kind of memeable, because the scene where he's talking to Caruthers, and Caruthers is like telling him about like, oh, like your odds are not so great, like you're most likely gonna die. And then Red responds by saying like, don't be negative. And I thought he was gonna say something after that. He doesn't say anything. He's just like, don't be negative. And I could just imagine like a meme of someone telling you that you're most likely going to die, not to mention like a very gruesome death. I just love that. I love that so much. It was my favorite. It was one of my favorite parts.
I'd say that'd be the most memeable part of the movie
Right?
itself. It gave me the like, don't be fucking rude from
Yeah,
like the Kardashians vibe. When I saw that, and in my head, I was actually thinking about like that would be funny for like a TikTok or something, like a TikTok audio where it's like, don't be negative.
One of my favorite lines in the movie comes from Jeremiah when he's talking to Mandy, and he's like, I can't remember it verbatim. I think maybe I do, but he's like, these fools couldn't recognize the radiant light as it was cast down upon them. I'm like, that is such a good line. Like, that's so funny. It's such a good twist on like they couldn't recognize X if it had hit them in the face. I love that line. It's great.
If we're talking about quotes from the movie that we really liked, the quote that I really liked was this is not what you think love is, or let me make sure I got that right. Y'all can talk while I figure out the right quote, but it was from Jeremiah, so give me a second.
I think I know what you're talking about. He's like, he's talking to Red. He's like, you think that's what love is? I'll show you what love is.
Yeah.
Oh, when he puts the gun to Lucy's head.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That was an interesting part. And I don't know what our next segment is, but if we want to talk about unsung hero, I feel like she was mine, because I feel like at the end there, when he kind of shows up and she's in the car and there's kind of that tense moment of like, is he going to kill her or is he not? Because I think in the end she's the only one that he lets go.
Yeah.
And I think that was really interesting. And I just, because the thing with like weird cult shit like this is like most of the time, most of the people in it are victims of the cult. And so like, with the sister Marlene, like, I don't know what her deal was.
She's not a victim. I'm sorry, she's not a victim.
Yeah,
Lucy's a victim, but Mother Marlene, that girl ain't no victim. She is evil.
Well, but I think the issue though is we don't really know anything about these people. We don't know where they came from. We don't know what Jeremiah's on with his ideology. Like, we don't know anything. We don't know anything about these people. But I feel like it would have been so interesting to know what Sister Lucy's deal was, what all of their deal was, because I feel like I just couldn't figure out what was going on. And I feel like if I were to make a spin-off, I would want to know what her story is and how she ended up wrapped up in this.
I completely agree, because I remember when during the scene when Caruthers was telling Red about the Black Skulls and their history, and he was like, oh yeah, they took a bad batch of LSD and they've been like this ever since. Like, I remember thinking, I was like, okay, but do we really need to know that? Like, I understand that it is to some extent important, but at the end of the day, like, they were still called by the children of the new dawn, you know, like they were the ones that were like summoned almost, and like they were given a sacrifice. But I feel like how did the children of the new dawn know that they needed a sacrifice in order for that to happen? Like what is their relationship to where it's just said and done, where it's like, oh, I call you, you kill someone, I kill someone for you, like it's all good, like we're fine, you know? Like I didn't understand that. So yeah, I'm on the same page. I think it was honestly kind of frustrating for me because like that scene when we see Sister Lucy's tear, like that to me was one of the most powerful scenes of the entire film, only because like a lot of them don't show emotion other than complete mania, you know? And so it's kind of like, oh, like they're human too, when they aren't really portrayed that way throughout the film.
Uh, I'm gonna disagree slightly on the like the exclusion of certain facts and details, because for me the a big part of the fun of this movie is the ambiguity, like not knowing exactly kind of what's going on. Is this real? Like are these things like monsters? Is the tainted blade of the pale knight a real artifact of like some sort of ancient like you know hero or whatever, or are these people just all crazy on LSD? And I think that goes along with it, and like the details and stuff, because it's really, this overall story is really simple, basic revenge plot. Person dies, person goes and avenges their death. um all the characters are very simple. There's not a ton of backstory. It doesn't really like spend time on that, but I feel like it doesn't need to, because the big focus of this movie is style, visuals, the music, and the performances. And that brings that comes to the discussion of um like what critics will say like indulgent movies, which I think is complete bullshit. um Not entirely. There are movies that are like you watch it and you're like, okay, but what's the point? But really, like, it's like film is like a you know, it's mainly a visual medium, and I think this reduces that to its most visual it can possibly be. In that it puts your traditional things, themes, plot, backstory down. It puts it about down by the wayside, and just becomes like more of a visual audio experience that I think uh, which doesn't require all this like explaining, like who are the black skulls, who are the you know who are all these people. And I think Carruthers serves like the little the little um what's the name, um exposition that we need. He gives us the basic information. They're crazy bikers, murder people, they're on LSD, dark shit. Got it. And
I
then you go on.
completely
So
agree.
I
I'm
think
sorry
this
to cut
is
you off, but
that's fine. No, totally.
I completely agree with you. I think the aspect that makes this movie great, in my opinion, is that you go in not knowing anything, and it's just messing with your head a majority of the time, because my head was going like a mile a minute trying to figure out what was going on in the movie, like trying to figure out what the plot was and how things are going to connect in the end. But now I know how it ends, and I know that it's not a plot heavy movie, and that the next time I watch it, because I 100% will watch it again, that I can just enjoy the visual aspect, because that's what this movie is. It's more of a visual rather than like a plot heavy.
I think it's safe to say, because now I'm realizing like I actually really appreciate that we watched this movie, Neil, because I think it's allowing us to understand that we watch movies differently, right? Like we look for different things, we appreciate different things, we criticize different things. And I think this is honestly one of the first times where we've had such a strong disagreement, other than like the Invisible Guest, where even that, like I understood where you were coming from, and I could like kind of adapt to where I like kind of agreed with you, you know. But I think this is the first film where like we're really just on different sides, and I don't know, I just really like that. I really appreciate this.
Yeah.
This is great.
And it's just a part of life. I mean, people will want to like just kind of like example, maybe people who like read books go to movies,
Mhm.
and they have a harder time kind of converting. Like people complain about book adaptations all the time. It's There's so different mediums, you cannot even compare the two. And then some people just they really like story, and they like storytelling and that kind of thing. Some people are more visual, and that's why I think a lot of people didn't like this movie, and it gets criticized a lot. And so there's another director. His name is Nicholas Winding Refn. He did Drive. Do you guys know that movie with Ryan Gosling?
No.
So it's Drive is his best movie. It's one of the only couple I've seen. He also did a movie Neon Demon, which was probably a little more famous. Well, he's very, very visual. His cinematography is really, really good. Drive is the only movie he's kind of done where like the plot and characters would mix really well with the visuals. Some of his other movies are very visual focused, and people will rip into his movies like no other. They're like, this is self-indulgent crap. Like this is complete drivel and everything. And
But that's the whole point, right?
what?
Sorry to cut you off, but that's the whole point, right? Like,
Well, sort of, but it's more like he's a visual focused director, and if you can take something out of his visuals, then you get something out of the movie, and it's kind of it's slightly unfair to so some of his movies do have like legit criticism where he tries to do a story and it fails because he's not that good at that, but some of them he doesn't. Like I think I haven't seen it, but I've heard like Neon Demons that way. But there's just some I think this movie in particular and this director has some unfair criticism towards his movies. People will complain about art for art's sake, and that goes for all kinds of things, drawings, whatever. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of a big fan of art for art's sake. Not everything has to have like a ton of meaning and theme and all this stuff crammed into it. Sometimes you can just look at a painting and go, "Damn, that looks awesome." So that's kind of how I see it.
I completely
yeah,
agree. And I think, sorry, Ashley, I know you've been really trying to talk.
it's okay.
I just wanted to say that, like, especially with movies, people forget that it is someone's interpretation of like something else. Like if it's a book, it's their interpretation of that book, and they're just creating it in their own version and what they saw. And that's what a lot of people forget when they're reading a book. They're like, "Oh, the book was 10 times better than the movie." And like, but that's someone else's opinion of what the book was. That's
Yeah.
what they saw when they were reading that book. And with this movie being just a visual thing, it's like you can't have a book for this. You can't have a book for this movie because
Totally,
it's
yeah.
not the
I would
plot.
never have thought about that. That's actually really cool.
This is something you can just watch and enjoy. And I know that for myself, it was very bright, and I did leave with a headache, and I had to like knock on my neighbor's door for Tylenol. But it's still something that I enjoyed, and it's like I'm happy that we had to watch this. I got the opportunity to because it's something that I've never seen before, and because it's someone else's interpretation of like visuals, and maybe it's like the director's interpretation of like what LSD does to him when he's on it, if he does LSD, or like how he like sees other people when they do LSD. But it's like something that we all get to share as just a visual rather than create our own interpretations of it, because it is what it is.
Well, I think even further than that, like going back to what Neil said, I think it's kind of the whole point to know that you're going to be criticized. Like in an industry like this, where you're
Totally, yeah.
creating such projects to where you know that universally they're going to be seen, right? Like people from different countries, people of different ages, different demographics, like you know that people are going to watch this. And I think with art, with anything, they're all different forms of art, you're going to have people hate it in order for people to also love it, like
Yeah.
that's the whole point. And I think even with acting, right, like if we're going to get really specific here, there are certain actors or even musicians that people genuinely hate, and they just have their own reasons, whether it be their acting style, their background, like it could be them as a person. But I feel like that really is just the whole point, is for you to build more of those opinions and thoughts around those kinds of actors or movies or ideas or art forms, to where you can find what you like, which is why I think, Neil, you like this movie so much, is because you watch so many different films. And I'm sure you've criticized, like when we watched Cassavetes' film in class, right? Like Neil, I remember, was it you?
He was the only one that liked the movie in
that didn't mind it.
I have to restate. I didn't really like the movie.
But you didn't mind
I
it.
didn't enjoy it, but there were aspects of it that I really like enjoyed, that I thought were good, and I understand like the kind of thing behind it, but it wasn't fun to watch, and I wouldn't watch it again because it didn't really do much for me. I didn't really care that much. But
To be completely honest, I think
really
I
care.
fell asleep at the end of that movie and just still went with the discussion anyways. And I'm like, did I miss something important?
my favorite part of that movie was like the last shot. That was like the one thing I
Yeah.
looked at and I was like, okay, I wish the movie was like that. Like it's got this jazz, it's this really somber kind of overhead shot of the city. I'm like, this is a really nice like thing. The rest of it, not great.
The background, not
Also,
great.
I just wanted to say, I didn't want to make it sound like I was saying this movie is impervious to criticism and shouldn't be criticized. What I meant was some things that people say about it, I think is the like just kind of wrong. Like, well, not okay. I don't want to say like. Of course, you can not like the movie, but I mean, if you look at it, you can't really look at it from the lens of like a traditional movie where you go, okay, what's the story? What's this? How is this like laid out? You know, we have to have it move a certain way. You know, get everything right, whatever. Um, that's what I meant. I didn't mean it can't be criticized because absolutely can totally be criticized. This is not something that I expect everyone to like and should like and tell them they should. You know.
I completely agree with you considering my favorite movie is Pink Panther. So, but Amanda, go ahead.
I feel like that goes back to the where we always end up in these discussions where it's like there's so many different ways to watch a movie, and in the sense that like, you know, if you watch a movie and all you get out of it is like, well, there's this weird plot hole here, or like, oh, this was, you know, you're not you're missing the point in a way.
Yeah.
And so like there's ways to watch a movie and not get what they're going for, and that doesn't necessarily like that's not the fault of the viewer, but then you can't be unable to understand that there are people that feel differently than you. If you
Yeah.
like if you watch this movie and you're like, that was shit, like I didn't get any of it, that was horrible, like you can have that opinion, but then you also have to be like, okay, but other people are watching it for other reasons and for other things, and just because I don't see that and that's not something I care about doesn't mean that those things aren't there. Because I'm like, I didn't really like the movie that much, but I also understand why you like it so much, and I can see that it's just not really what I look for in a movie. And so I'm like, yeah, that was cool, I probably won't watch it again, but I can understand why someone looking for that kind of experience would enjoy this movie.
Totally.
And I think there's also a difference between enjoying and appreciating, right? Like I think, like Jordana, what you just said about the idea that this movie can't be a book. Like I never have even thought, like I've always thought, you know, like everyone knows that if a book comes before a movie, then oftentimes the movie is really bad. But if a movie comes, or if
A book comes after the movie, then
yes,
it's
then it's like, yeah, then it's kind of hard to compare. But I think with these kinds of movies and going off of what Jordana was saying, it goes to show that a lot of things that are more experimental have like less wiggle room to like explain why they did what they did, which kind of like reminds me, like, you can't write this in a book. Like you can't write why they did certain things in different scenes for whatever reason. Like, and it kind of goes to what Amanda was saying, like off of interpretation. Like it's, I don't know, it's just this is what I love about these discussions. It's like they make me realize a lot more than I would have if I just watched it on my own.
I'd have to say that I did really enjoy this movie, and it is something that I would watch again because I want to understand it more. And like I understand, Neil, you had to watch it like 2 times before you like could actually like really enjoy the movie for what it is, and I completely get that. I know for a lot of movies that it's not just the one-time experience, it's the experiences you have after. And it's like when I grew up, I would go to like the museum every year, the same museum, and it's like the museum never changes, but I've changed, you know. So it's like you're
Wait,
seeing
that's
it.
so cute.
Okay, I hated going to the museum though.
No, but
like,
that's
like
like,
my family would always make me, but like I would always be in a different place in life when I would be experiencing that movie. So it's like I understand that like now, like with this movie, it's like last night I was in a completely different space than I would be tonight going into watching this movie. Like if I chose to watch it again tonight. where it's like now I'm not going to just be scared or like worried about like what could happen. It's just going to leave me in this space where I can just enjoy the movie and see more of the comedy in it. Because it's like I could hear Neil laughing and it's like I could chuckle at some of the things, but I feel like I was missing a lot of the points. And like I'm seeing now that a lot more of that movie is just a comedy than just like there to scare you, you know?
Yeah. I feel like it's more funny due to the absurd nature of it and just the performances. Like there are things that are meant to be like very dry, cheeky, kind of funny. For me, I feel like it's perfect and it doesn't mess with the tone of the movie. Like the movie's still dark and it's still like for me, I go from the scene where Mandy's being burned alive and it's just really like really sad, obviously. And Nicolas Cage's um performance in that scene is really good. And kudos to everyone in this movie for being able to cry. The worst thing in a movie or a TV show is when they have to cry, but the actor can't cry on command. Everyone in this movie could, and it makes it way better. And then, later on, we have, I don't know, Jeremiah being like, saying something stupid and funny. And I'm just like, man, how does it do that? It's like amazing how it like controls how you feel that way, So, yeah. I want to bring up what people think about what is this movie, where does this movie take place, like I want to talk about like get away from criticism for a bit and talk about whether or not this movie is actually fantasy, because in my head this movie is fantasy. I know it's LSD and stuff, but I like to believe that that final shot of the landscape, which is my favorite shot in the movie, in my head that's real. That's what that place looks like, and it looks awesome. So
I would argue that it's not. I think that but okay, that was in. I will say this by saying I agree with you, but I think my personal experience was like, I think that's why I struggled, because I was like, was this supernatural? Was it not? But I never thought, is it fantasy? Like I always was wondering like, oh, like, are they human? But I always thought like, I'm trying to think of how to put this in like an articulate way. If we were to take away all of those oversaturated edits and effects, it would just be a movie, right? Like there was nothing that happened in it where it was like, oh, like fairies, wizards, dragons, like come on over. Like there was nothing in it that like screamed fantasy to me. It was more like really an LSD trip. Like I feel like it was their way of allowing us to become someone who was also on LSD or just super disoriented, that was just experiencing this cult like destroy these people's lives. But again, like it's important to recognize that it was very out of place. And I think it's fair to say that I agree with you, because throughout the entire movie, I was wondering the same thing. So I guess it's fair to be like, you know what, like maybe that's what they were going for, but they were also trying to keep some kind of reality intertwined in the mix. But I don't think I've also watched this movie enough times as like Neil to like definitively say like, oh, it wasn't or it was.
I think it really depends on what. Oh, sorry. One. I think it depends on what you're looking for and what you're into. Like this is a movie that's very much, if you like this, you like it, and if you don't, you don't.
Yeah.
And if you and it allows, I think, for both to be possible, both it be real and take place in real life, or be in this weird fantasy world where like that knife that Red gets stabbed with is like some real thing and not like it's totally unexplained. And I love that part about it. It's like this really mysterious, like, how'd you get that? If you were on Earth, so I like that you can look at it both ways, and I think both ways it works. Jordan.
Okay. So what I was gonna say was I think of it as in the mentality of like there's been so many posts where it's like, oh, when you're on drugs, you're seeing the world as it really is. And that like the world is actually just a simulation, and that's why they say drugs are bad and not to do drugs, because you're seeing what they don't want you to see. So that's the mentality I think that this movie is, where it's like everyone that is on this LSD is seeing the world as it really is. And that's why when we see Red take that like little taste of the like weird LSD drink, that his mind is like completely blown and he sees that cell tower outside in like a completely different light than how we see it at the end of the movie. And it's like it's just taking him into the reality of like, this is what the world is supposed to look like, and this is why all these people are so crazy.
Yeah, I don't know where I stand on it. Because on the one hand, like when they have that landscape shot, I got such Lord of the Rings vibes at
Mhm.
one point. Like I don't remember when exactly it happened, but I was like, that looks like the mountains. And like when he's like looking down the hill, I think he's looking down at the like weird church building or something. And I was like, this has big like on the way to the mountain vibes. I don't know.
It's a lot like
And
Mordor.
yeah. And I feel like um also in their house, I got like weird like on another planet vibes. I don't know if it's because they were talking about their favorite planets, and so that kind of put me in the vibe of like maybe they're on a different planet, but like the lighting was just so weird. Um and so I don't know, I kind of got like weird Black Mirror type
Mm-hmm.
vibes from it. I don't know, because on the one hand, like I agree with you, Ash, that if you took away the edits, like would it feel more realistic? But those the Black Skulls, something was up with them. Like when he would kill them, like I was like, that's just not how a human dies. I don't
Mhm.
think. I mean, I don't clearly I don't know what it's like to like cut somebody's throat, but like when he's on like when they're in front of the TV and the blood is just like spewing out all over his face, I was like what, how is that happening? So I don't like, that was the thing I couldn't
There's
figure out.
explanations of what happens if you actually slit someone's throat on YouTube. If you want to ever check that out.
Jordana, what do you watch?
No, it's
What
like
is-
those like 3 a.m. videos. Those 3 a.m. videos.
She said that
just
so
appear.
nonchalantly, did not stutter.
No, like you know when you're on YouTube, you get like caught in the like black hole, and then
I
like it's like
guess.
3 a.m. and there's those weird
Oh,
videos
yeah,
that
yeah.
they're recommending you. It's like I just know that that's one of them.
This is why
Have I
love
watched
you.
it? No.
I feel like half of the time, like something that Jordana says, I'm just like, what? And then I have to take a step back. I'm like, oh, you know what? Makes sense. I don't know how it makes sense, but it
What do
makes
you mean?
sense. Because like, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know, but that's why I love you. Like you're just so unpredictable in a sense where you're just like, what just happened? But I'm okay with it. Like if anyone else said that, I would be like, are you okay? Like, you all right at 3 a.m. in the morning? But
You know what's so weird? Literally, like on campus on the green on Wednesday, a kid just randomly asked me, "What's your favorite acid?" I was just like, "What? What does that
Like,
mean?" I was like,
I wish I was
"Hydrochloric."
there. I
What
wish
do you
I saw
mean?
your face.
I literally was like,
Yeah,
hydrochloric.
That's
Sulfuric.
hilarious. Oh my god, that would be such a good tweet. Someone asked me the other day what my favorite acid was. And I said hydrochloric. That's amazing, Jordana. You should
Follow
like
me on
trademark
Twitter.
that.
It's Slurpson. But anyways,
Hilarious.
I was so shocked. I was like, hydrochloric. Like it's the first thing that popped in my head as a chem major. Like,
you know, I'm like acetic, perhaps, maybe some hydrobromic if we're really
Perhaps.
crazy.
no, because I literally was like, maybe H2SO4, you know, a good sulfuric. Okay, so we haven't done he said, she said. We already talked about whether it was great or not. And we have to do one word. But before we do those, can I actually talk about the quote?
Yes. Did you find the quote?
Yes, I did. Okay, so he says, "You think you're so in love." Okay, and that made me think about how he's like proving like, oh, these people like love me by like them willing to kill themselves for me and like put themselves up for that. But the thing I was instantly thinking of was the saying that love is a drug, you know, and how in this movie everyone is addicted to this one drug, so they're like completely selling their soul and their entire life for this one drug, and then they're just following one other person that is leading them to that drug. So they're not in love with him, they're in love with the idea of getting that drug from him. And he's just like, they're in love with me, they're so like embodied by my power, but it's not him, it's the
You
drug.
could write a paper on this. Could you imagine if we're in class right now and we had to write an essay on this? Like, I feel like there would be so much room for this. You should tell Hugh, like, if he ever has a semester where this is along like his thematic plan. I feel like this would be a good film. Like it seems so experimental and it's so different. Like I'm sure all of you guys are on the same page. I've never watched a film. I mean, other than Neil, I've never watched a film
I
like
think
this.
the only thing is that you would need analysis, and I think this movie leaves very
So much
little room
room.
for thematic analysis, so it would have to be all formal.
Yeah.
Because I think this movie has little to no themes. I mean, there's the tiger,
Blood.
there's the red.
I'd say love is a theme in this that you could
Like,
talk
yeah.
about.
I feel like blood
but-
can also, like, you can talk about why there was so much blood.
You can
Like,
talk about the color red.
yes.
That would be a major theme.
I tried so hard to figure out. I was like taking notes of all the times the colors change because I was like, oh, like I'm like looking at my little notebook here, and I'm like, okay, red and yellow lighting in the house with greens and blues outside. But then I was like, well, but no, Mandy is the red light, but then like also like the cult is orange light, but then sometimes there's purple light, which is like in between, and then at one point the trees go from green to red. And I was like, what does this all mean? I couldn't figure it out. I'm sure there's something there. I was like trying to track it. I don't know.
You're an overthinker, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yes,
The entire time. Because I was like, and I love colors in movies.
Yeah.
Like, that's my favorite thing. And I feel like we talked about this in one of the other ones.
We talked about it in Far From Heaven.
That was the one. I love a good like colored scene, and like La La Land. The colors are
I hate La La Land.
incredible. It's been a while since I've actually watched it. I don't really remember the plot. I just remember I really liked the lighting.
It's the fact that she can say that with a smile on her face. I hate La La Land.
No, because nobody needed the movie La La Land. I think we were fine with the Demi Lovato song. Okay, like
Oh, so good. So good. That whole album. Don't forget.
Should we get into the quotes?
Yeah, we should get into the
Yes.
quote.
He said, she said.
I also had a question for you guys. Did you guys want to unpack the characters? Because I feel like there's so much that we can unpack with Mandy, and we just did not talk about it.
Do we want to do that like after this? Because I think this is the last segment we need, right?
Yeah, and then one word.
Yeah, and then one word. We can like run through these kind of quick and then get to that.
Okay.
All right.
I agree though, because there's one in particular that I would love to
Unpack.
talk about. Yes.
Okay. Who wants to go first? Anyone feel very strongly about their quote? Ash?
I actually was very excited. This is the one time where I was like, this is it took me like 1 minute. It usually takes me like almost 10 minutes to look for a quote because I'm like very picky. But the minute I read this, I was like, yeah, this is what I experienced.
All of you guys say quotes, and I'm sitting here like, we had to pick quotes on the movie. I thought I already talked about this.
I'm sorry, a review.
I thought y'all were talking about the movie. Like, I was like, quotes. I already unpacked mine. Like, let me
One of
find another one.
One of my favorite things though is like going back to these videos, and I feel like all of us have it, but like seeing internal panic, you know, like just like seeing it in their eyes. Because I feel like we've done enough videos by now to know. So mine is off of a user review on IMDb, and it read as follows. This really is not for everyone, and that is just fine. Also, story wasn't anything new or special, just typical revenge story. Really liked how this looked, sounded, and felt. Visuals and colors are just outstanding, and that was something that hooked me from the start. Really trippy stuff in a good way. Music and sounds were pushing this dark, overall sinister feel and worked perfectly. And also, Nick gave us a great performance near insanity. And I think my favorite part was the latter, because in my notes, I'm like, don't know how I feel about Nick. And then I go back, I'm like, change my mind. Because at first I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about Paige. Like, but I also couldn't think of an actor that I would have had replace him. But then by the end of the movie, I was like, oh my gosh, this was so satisfying. And I'm so happy that it was him. But yeah, that's my quote or review.